Good morning. In this presentation, I will be talking about the new privileges that we've added to Part 21, the published material, scope and criteria for these privileges, some of the principles, the process to obtain privilege and to extend the privilege, and some further guidance. Questions and answers at the end, please. So, on the new privileges, they introduce a possibility for DOA holders to, by themselves, under this privilege, approve certain major changes, certain STCs, or certain major repairs. And we do that under quite strict conditions, and they are specified in the AMC material associated. So all these designs need to be similar in design, should be repetitive as far as the certification process is going. DOA needs to have good performance on these topics and have a low risk of the project itself, which is expressed by a low LOI likelihood. So the topic is very much linked to LOI, although it's not the same. You can consider this as a risk class 0 for LOI, but we really want to target projects where we know that the risk is very low, where we know that you as a DOA do a good job, and as a consequence, our review of data doesn't make a lot of sense. We would be spending time on something we already know. You are doing a good job. We know the certification processes you're using. We know the data you will be generating. So in that sense, our involvement should be very low, or even in these cases, 0. We published the following material. It was already mentioned before that in the amendment to Part 21, 2019-897, we changed the paragraph 263C, where a change has been made in paragraph 5 of that material, where we now talk about certain major repairs, and I'll come back to that later. We have 2 new privileges in there. One is for the certain major changes, and one is for certain STCs. Associated to that material, we have some further guidance. So there's 2 AMCs. AMC number 1 explains the scope of the new privilege and also the criteria for limitation and the eligibility of the new privilege. AMC number 2 talks about the process, how to obtain the privilege and how to extend the privilege. Guidance material on especially numbering system for the changes and repairs we're proposing. And we do have our internal department policy. That is relatively new. It's at issue 3 at the moment, and you can obtain it through your DOA team leaders. Issue 3, we felt that we should be able to disclose that to you. It's an internal department policy. It is something you can read and expect questions from the DOA team leader when you go for these new privileges, and you can anticipate a little bit on our thinking and what we would like to see when you start using such privileges. About the scope and criteria of these privileges. So the privileges are not for just any project, not just any major change, any STC, or any major repair. They are under very strict control and have a lot of prerequisites that you need to fulfill to make sure that indeed those projects are of a very low risk. So there are changes, and when I say changes, I mean STCs and repairs as well. I will just continue talking about changes. Changes similar to those that have been previously approved by EASA for the same DOA holder. So we need to have seen at least one of those projects from you and have certified that. You need to meet the eligibility criteria, and I will give a listing later. Sorry, yeah. There's an aspect to the repairs where we changed C5. So before C5 was already there was the option to have a major repair privileges. It was targeted at the TC holders for their own TCs, where TC holders were able to obtain this privilege and could approve by themselves major repairs to their own TCs, as well for STC holders that could approve major repairs to their own STCs. We've added 2 limitations. They were already there a little bit in the background. They are now more prominent within this AMC. So we need to talk to those that already had the privilege C5, that there are 2 exclusions for the use of this privilege. It would be a new interpretation of the certification basis. We need to be involved, and it needs to be an application to the agency in that case. Or you would have an application of a certification specification that is different from the one used for type certification. So again, it's a change of the certification basis. We need to be involved if the repair actually needs that. This would be very much an exception. I haven't seen any repair that needs that, but we just wanted to make sure that these limitations are very prominently in the AMC material, and we need to have a discussion with those that already have this privilege, that these are the limitations that are described in the procedures. Then we have the other case, where now anybody can receive a privilege on doing major repairs, again, for those low-risk projects. So where you've already shown through an application of a major repair that the risk is low, that you have good DOA performance, and that you fulfill certain other conditions that I will come back to. So there's 2 aspects to the C5 privilege. It's very important to remember that. The AMC provides mostly exclusions where a privilege does not apply. And here's a listing, and there's a second sheet as well. So whenever the TCDS needs to be revised, the privilege can't apply. The only organization that can do that is the authority. So in that case, we need an application to revise the TCDS. Still, if it's a project that you've done repeatedly, we may have a low LOI. But that's a different story. That's then on the topic of LOI. Also, those projects that need an amendment to the existing certification basis are not eligible for doing it under the privilege. In principle, not eligible are those changes that need a revision of the awareness limitation section or operational limitations. But we also said we don't want to be fully black and white on this one. We need to have a discussion and a case-by-case evaluation if it's really repetitive, whether or not it can be done under the privilege. So there's a little asterisk for that one. Any changes triggered by an AD, I think it's very obvious that we want to be involved. If it's terminating action, for instance, to an AD, we need to be involved and need to approve that change. Similar to an AMOC to an AD. Here I just want to mention that currently, and we're going to revise it, the guidance material talks about ALTMOC. That's an error. ALTMOC is a different concept, so we need to talk about AMOCs to an AD, and also when a change is providing an AMOC to an AD, we need to be involved as authority, and therefore it does not fall under privilege. It continues the list. Any significant changes, I think there it's also very clear that it does not fall under the privilege. If you apply more conservative requirements compared to the reference change, so if you've already done a project, but in this case, in the next case, you will apply more conservative requirements, we need to be involved. Also, when noise and emission characteristics are affected, as a principle, again, we said we don't want to be fully black and white here, so we can have a case-by-case evaluation if the things are really repetitive, that this still can be done under privileges. Anything critical, critical characteristics or single failures with catastrophic effect would get you out of the low likelihood in LOI already. So again, they're not eligible for the privilege. For engines per pressure, as we don't have a catastrophic, of course here is the single failures with hazardous effects. And a specialty, if you already hold the privilege, but on the reference project or on the changes you've already done, we found a non-compliance in the reference change. So anything during continued awareness process, we see something going wrong with that particular change, there might be an unsafe condition. Of course, then also for the next application of such a change, we need to be involved and make sure that the unsafe condition is addressed. Some of the principles on how to obtain the privilege. We start out with reference projects. We call them reference projects. So they form a basis of our review. You've applied for these reference projects. We know how you're working. We know the certification processes you'll be using for these particular types of projects. We also know how well you're doing that as a DOA, so meaning the DOA performance should be good. And with that, you can apply for the privilege or to extend the privilege later on. So here in a more positive note, not the exclusions, but where you can use the privilege for. So similarity with other changes already approved by EASA for the same DOA. So meaning the reference projects. There's a repetitiveness to the certification processes. You're not going to certify it in a completely different way. It is basically the same way you're going to certify these changes. You have a good performance as a DOA during the last projects, and the nature of the project is such that there is a low likelihood of risk as determined by doing the LOI evaluation and the risk-based approach during the reference project. Of course, you also need to describe in your procedures how you're going to use this privilege, what documentation you're going to generate, and all of that good stuff. Once the privilege is granted, you can go ahead and use your privilege much in the same way as you do minor changes on the privilege. You can do these under the privilege, particularly for the projects that the privilege is applicable to. And this list of projects is called list associated with the privilege in the AMC. So this is a list you maintain as a DOA, but we always want to be there every step of the way. If you want to add a project to that list, we need to be there and have a look on such cases. As far as the reference projects go, ideally they are projects that you apply for under the LOI concept. So we get as output also things like low LOI likelihood. We get the DOA performance on that. As a minimum, there needs to be one, but there can be more than one. And we need to see what is best in a particular case. If you are intending to apply for a privilege or more than one privilege, we'd like you to separate the applications. Of course, the application needs to be done as a significant change. So please, if you want to do both major changes and STCs, there's companies that can do both. Please submit 2 significant changes so that one doesn't hold up the other one and we can evaluate them separately. It's just a matter of practicality. Of course, when I mentioned already before, when I talk about changes here in this diagram, you can replace change by either STC or repair. The principles are the same of the privileges. As a repeat, conditions for issue of the privilege, you need to have a reference project. We need to have LOI. If you've done a project in the past, in the recent past, but not yet done under LOI, you still would like to use it as a reference project, you think it's eligible to be used as a reference project, we need to fill the gap that not doing LOI on this project has left. So we need to do an extra exercise on that. We don't want to exclude it fully. The ideal case is you apply now under the LOI process, but some recent projects we may want to look at as well and use them as reference projects. Again, similarity, design, installation, operation, basically the same as in the reference project. We need these things to be quite the same. They're never 100% the same, but they need to be quite the same. So we know the risk is low, you are doing a good job, we know what type of job you're doing, meaning certification-wise, and therefore our involvement is not necessary. And that's also expressed by the repetitiveness of the certification process. Performance and experience. Of course, if during the reference project your performance as DOA is low, I think it would be silly to give you a privilege on that. We need to know that you are doing a good job. Low performance does not reflect that. According to the AMC, medium or high level is the means. Of course, we are aiming for a high level of the DOA. If the reference project showed a medium level of competence and performance of the DOA, we need to have a story on, okay, it was medium, this is what the company has done, this is what you as DOA have done, so next time it will be high and we need to have the confidence in that. The door is open for medium performance, but there needs to be a story why on the next project it will be high. And of course, again, as mentioned, low likelihood during LOI. The process, in a nutshell, in practice it will be, there will be quite some bits involved. It starts with you, well, first of all, making up your mind if you think these privileges are useful to you as a DOA. Of course, you need to have those projects that are of this repetitive nature and are of a low risk. If you don't have this project, all your projects are quite different from each other, a privilege doesn't make sense. If you do lots of repetitions, like you're installing each time almost a similar cabin into an aircraft, just as an example, or you're doing TCAS STCs with a lot of repetition, it might be something that you would want to think of. So if you decide to go for a privilege, you apply with a Form 82, so a significant change. You provide the procedure. You establish this list associated with the privilege. At least there should be one project on it. We're not going to approve a privilege with an empty list. There should be at least one project. You provide a justification document. So the justification document you provide is there to show to us that indeed you're fulfilling all the eligibility criteria for this project under the privilege. And then we will assess. For sure, the DOA team leader will make use of PCM and experts to assess, also to look at that reference project. What were the outcomes of this reference project? What were the details, and do we indeed agree that what you've provided in the justification document is indeed providing compliance with the eligibility criteria? If we're all happy with that, we will update the TOA. We will add the privilege to the list of privileges in the terms of approval, and there will be a limitation at the end that will refer to your document called the list associated with privileges. A little bit about the content of the justification document. For sure, we start with a reference project, compliance with the criteria, the certification program, related possible types and models, also for a dedicated product if the type of model has no technical influence. Yeah, it's working again. The list of requirements and corresponding certification process, if not identical to reference certification programs. So, of course, these changes must be small, but we do allow some flexibility in there. A detailed description of the project or projects and what we're talking about, and any other limits on the use of the privilege. Sometimes you need to apply limits to the project that is applicable under the privilege to make sure you're fulfilling the eligibility criteria. So there's tools you can use to put limits on it. It's not open-ended. Not putting limits would not fulfill always the eligibility criteria, so sometimes you can impose on yourself certain limitations for use of this privilege, and then it will work under that particular privilege for that particular project. Once we have established that you will have the privilege and there will be this list associated with the privilege, as I mentioned before, with at least one project on it, how do we extend this list with new projects? Of course, you do not want just one project on it. In most of the cases, you would want to do several projects to be applicable under this privilege. So it's not done through a significant change. It's not done through an update of the terms of approval, but we do want to review. So it's an in-between process where we want to do away with all the administrative burden. You mentioned to the DOA team leader that you're wanting to apply another project for under the privilege. The DOA team leader will then review the justification document you provided. It's basically the same thing as with the initial application of the privilege, but without a significant change application. When we accept, you update the list associated with the privileges, because it's your document. On the particular topic of repairs, for the use of the repair privilege under the existing or the previous C5, there's no change. Yeah, so we don't want to go there applying new or having a list associated with the privilege. It will basically be the same. It's just those two preconditions that you need to add to your procedures. And for repairs, the repair privilege on the other side of C5, so for any other DOA, not the TC holder of the product or not the STC holder of the particular change. As I just mentioned, check the eligibility, provide the justification document. We accept if we all agree, and then you can update the privilege, the list associated with the privilege. Again, we don't want to make it too burdensome, so we want to avoid having to update the TOA each time. It is done by you updating that list with our knowledge. I do not intend to take you through these flow charts. I just want to have the picture here on the screen. We could if you wanted to, but in the interest of time, these are the flow charts that take you through the process. They are a direct copy from the AMC, so please have a look. I think they're very useful to guide you through the process, just a step-by-step guide to get you to a successful application of the privilege. Some further guidance. The guidance material itself proposes a numbering system. Why are we doing that? Of course, you can decide for yourself, but we want these things to be recognizable. Your customers, if we all can agree and use the same numbering system, will recognize it as an STC of EASA. I think that's very important, especially in the beginning, where your customers will have to get used to that they get an STC that is approved directly by the DOA without EASA involvement. So that's why we're proposing a numbering system. We're also proposing to use an approval form. They look very much like the EASA certificates we normally provide for major changes, STC, or major repairs. They even have almost the same numbering. There's just a 9 in front of it. That's just for recognizability. So we encourage the use of these forms. You don't have to do it, of course. It's guidance material. But if everybody uses these forms in the same format, also your customers will recognize it. They will know what they have in their hands. And I think that's useful for everybody. So it's very much encouraged. The internal policy that I mentioned at the beginning gives some steps. And like I said, expect questions to be asked from the DOA team leader according to this policy. So have a look at that. If you didn't get a copy yet of that policy, please ask your DOA team leader. And of course, have the discussion. Have an open discussion with the DOA team leader. Also, when you intend to apply for a project that will become a reference project, make that known to the DOA team leader, also to the certification team, so we already can take into account, we can gather upfront the experience and anticipate that you will apply for the privilege later on. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Well, thanks, Rob. There are plenty of questions, I can tell you.
Oh, no.
Yes. If you can bring the Slido screen to the front. Thanks. The first one, for example, how to perform validations. As far as I understand it, we have the tip and we accept each other's system. This change of the system should still be covered by the tip. So it is covered by the tip.
So we did discuss and inform the FAA on what we're doing here, so they know. Validation will go through us, of course, according to the validation principles. You submit your data to us, we will pass it on to the FAA, but we will have a look, of course. We're not going to blindly be postmasters and just hand it to the FAA. We will have a look to such data, such design data. But in principle, it's the same system. Would the STC approval under this new privilege be equivalent to an STC issued by EASA and listed in the EASA STC database? Yes. So what we want from you is that once you have approved a project under privilege, that you send us the data for that project for inclusion in the list. And yes, it is exactly the same. It's an approved STC that is generated under the EASA system, much in the same way as your minor changes are recognized under the EASA system. There's no difference in the application. Would privileges be time limited? That's a very good question, I think. The policy document gives some guidance on this. So we say the privilege does not expire. What we do want you to have in your procedure, when you want to do a project under privilege, of course, you need to check this project is eligible to be done under this privilege. And one of those points could be where you say, well, what was the last time we've done this project? Was it 5 years ago? Did all my staff change? Did the way I'm working change? Should this still be applicable? Should I still be using this privilege? Or does it not apply anymore? So from the rule, there's no expiration date or anything like that for the projects on the list or the privilege itself, but we do want you to have a sensible process in your procedures that evaluates this. And that's what the DOA Team Leader will be looking for. For those certain changes, we will follow the same approach as per the minor changes, namely will not apply to EASA, correct? Yes, that is correct. So there's no application to EASA, no fee for the application to be paid to EASA, just to anticipate that question. And it will be much in a similar way as the minors. Of course, it's not fully the same. For instance, on the STCs, you need to send us the STC so we can include them in the list. How many reference projects do we need? Minimum 1. If the 1 describes your project completely, we're satisfied LOI-wise. We have a low likelihood all of the boxes can be ticked properly by just using this single reference project. We would be okay with that. If you want to widen the use of that particular project under the privilege, but we only saw one aspect during a single project, then we might need to see more projects. So also there you can be smart about what do we put initially on the list of projects, and maybe you can extend it later on the basis of new projects you're doing. Also there, maybe it's good to say at this moment, if you are applying for an STC, let's take an STC example, and you want to provide this STC on a series of aircraft, and the first STC application is on one particular aircraft. Be very conscious of the fact that certification bases of aircraft differ, and choose wisely on what the STC certification basis will be, so that your certification basis covers a wide range of those aircraft types you're intending to offer your STC on. So if you do that smartly, then the privilege will apply to many projects. If you start with an older aircraft and use the certification basis of that aircraft as per the TCDS, you might struggle arguing to us that it also will apply to an aircraft with a newer certification basis.
Okay, maybe 2 more questions before we break for lunch.
So the classification, the first one is interesting. The classification of a new change often takes account of similar designs previously approved as major. This can result in a minor change. EASA comment, yes, I do have a comment. What is major on an aircraft is tomorrow major is in 10 years major. So we look at the appreciable effect it has on the aircraft. What it doesn't feature in the evaluation of a classification is DOA competence, DOA experience, etc. So if there is an appreciable effect on the aircraft, the change should be classified as major, period. That should be it.
There are a number of questions that link this new privilege to LOI and the performance of LOI rules. Can you respond on that a little bit?
Is it necessary that the reference projects have been performed under LOI rules? Basically, yes. As I mentioned, we want the reference project to be done under LOI. we need as output a low likelihood. That's LOI speak. That's how we get to that point. We can look at recent projects not done under LOI where we fill the gap. So we do the LOI, or you do the LOI exercise after the project has already been certified, maybe in this year or the year before. I don't want to look at too old projects, but if you've done a recent project where LOI was not done formally yet, we can fill the gap by doing the LOI exercise with hindsight. Yes.